Welcome to the Blue Economy, our next frontier, made possible by a generous contribution from Babcock Canada. CHEK Media is proud to be sponsoring this session and Rising Economy Week. CHEK has been serving Vancouver Islanders and the business community since 1956. Now I'd like to introduce Craig Norris. Craig Norris has a 20-year career in business leadership and infrastructure development in Western Canada, anchored in leadership roles within one of Canada's leading architecture, engineering, and environmental consulting firms. In 2015, he moved from corporate consulting to focus on developing Canada's superyacht business on the West Coast, where he led the complete development of Canada's first superyacht marina and service center located in Victoria Harbour, British Columbia. As CEO of Community Marine Concepts Limited, he travels the world as an ambassador for the Pacific coast of North America, listening intently to what the superyacht community is looking for while advocating for what Canada and the Pacific can offer. Craig is also the chair and founding member of the Canadian Superyacht Association, a nonprofit organization charged with supporting the sustainable growth of the superyacht sector in Canada. Craig, over to you.
Thank you so much, Rob, for opening the session, and to your team at CHEK for their support in making this event possible. And I'll just give another shout out to Babcock Canada for sponsoring this session. Okay, we have 5 panelists today for the session on Blue Economy. First off, we have Kate Moran. She is the president and CEO of Ocean Networks Canada, a not-for-profit society created in 2007 by the University of Victoria, with a vision to enhance the life on Earth by providing knowledge and leadership that deliver solutions for science, society, and industry. A very interesting piece of Kate's bio is that from 2009 to 2011, she was seconded to the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, where she served as the assistant director and focused on Arctic, polar, ocean, and climate policy issues, along with the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Then we have Christian Rangen, co-founder and partner at Innovate in Norway. Chris is a globally recognized expert in ecosystem clusters and accelerating national transformation. His digital advisory has clients in 65 countries and growing. I had the pleasure, the pleasure of getting to know Christian just recently, as he is a key member of the team advising us on the prospect of an ocean innovation hub and cluster for our region. We then have Julie Angus. She is the CEO and co-founder of Open Ocean Robotics, a marine drone company that is transforming how we understand and protect our oceans. She's a leading adventurer, best-selling author, scientist, and entrepreneur who was awarded National Geographic's Adventurer of the Year award when she became the first woman to row across the Atlantic Ocean from mainland to mainland. I have to put a pause in here. This has to be the topic of a completely separate conversation. Julie, I beg you. Wow. Anyway, next we have Justin Sternberg, who's the program director for the Alaska Ocean Cluster. Justin is an entrepreneur who has founded and worked with clean energy and ocean technology companies, providing expertise in fundraising, strategic planning, and business development. In 2010, Mr. Steinberg co-founded Continuum Industries to develop implementation strategies for the transition to solid-state street lighting. And last but certainly not least, we have Joshua Berger, the founder and board chair of Maritime Blue. It's an independent cluster organization, which is a strategic alliance for accelerating maritime innovation and sustainability through knowledge sharing, technology, business, and workforce development projects. As the governor's maritime sector lead for the state of Washington, Joshua works as the liaison between maritime industry stakeholders, the governor's office, legislature, and state agencies. I really have to say, wow, what a great group we have here. We're lucky to have you, and thank you for being here. So let's get to the discussion. Let me set a very, very quick stage because you're going to hear from the pros here. So we're here to talk about the blue economy and how the West Coast can accelerate its ocean and marine sectors to compete in the global blue economy. So let's jump into humankind's next great frontier, the ocean. I believe Joshua's website had a succinct quote from the World Bank defining the blue economy as the sustainable use of ocean resources for economic growth, improved livelihoods, and jobs while preserving the health of the ocean ecosystems. A comment from the Center for the Blue Economy in Monterey it broadened it a bit slightly, inferring that the term blue economy has three but distinct meanings. One, the overall contribution of the oceans to economies. Two, the need to address the environmental and ecological sustainability of oceans. And three, the ocean economy as a growth opportunity for both developed and developing countries. This topic is obviously massively broad. So let's move to our esteemed panel here to help us bring this all into perspective. I'm going to begin with a few questions for our panelists. Then just over the halfway mark, we're going to ask attendees to submit your questions. Of course, you can do that throughout, and they will accumulate on my side panel here in my peripherals. And the team at SIP there is going to help me organize those, and we'll ask those at that point. Please use the chat to interact. If possible, use the Zoom chat, and the production team again will monitor the Whova chat and Q&A on the separate. If you're joining us through the app, they're all going to end up in the same place, I'm told, so I'll be able to see and ask those questions of the panelists. Reminder, if you're posting your takeaways on social media, please use the hashtag Rising Economy Week 2020. And finally, to our panelists, a reminder to please keep your responses to 2 or 3 minutes so that we have a chance to hear from everyone. So let's get me to stop talking here and get you to start. So let's hear about what's going on in other places, and then we'll bring it back home again, and then we're going to head out again. So let's start with Washington State. Maritime Blue is responsible for leading the state's ocean cluster work. Josh, what can you tell us about what the key components and areas of focus for the cluster are?
Yeah, thank you, Craig, and a great opportunity to join these panelists and Rising Economy Week. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Washington Maritime Blue and spun out of our effort to create a kind of the first in the U.S. a comprehensive strategy for the blue economy. So we took a look at, especially in our partnership with our friends in Norway. So good to see Christian here, and other centers of excellence for the blue economy around the globe, and looked at the development of strategies around maritime and ocean economies and the growth in this term, the blue economy. We know academics are debating parts and pieces of this, and we generally agree, and want to make sure also as you were talking about the definition of the blue economy earlier, one piece we certainly include is the role of the ocean and the ocean economy to support and enable resilient and equitable communities. So there's a really important kind of social equity piece to the blue economy, certainly in our definition here and many others. So we created the strategy for the state, and what we recognized was these independent cluster organizations were really some of the most effective tools to implement acceleration and draw investment. And having done a lot of statewide, large multi-stakeholder planning efforts, they're really only as good as the graphics of the plan unless you're really implementing them. And so we spun out an independent cluster organization. You know, we call it Washington State Strategy, but it's not necessarily just the governor's strategy or the Department of Commerce. It's all of those stakeholders that created it, that quadruple helix of public, private, research institutions, community, and workforce partners. And so they're accountable to implement it. And so this cluster organization really was the mechanism to do that. Topic-wise, we're quite broad here in Washington. I think we're really fortunate to have so many parts and pieces. We're the 4th largest container gateway in the United States, with the ports of Seattle and Tacoma, the Northwest Seaport Alliance. We have very strong renewable energy and marine energy component, underwater robotics, advanced manufacturing, right from our aerospace sector, and then you include the growing tech sector that exists here. It's kind of the perfect breeding ground with values around environmental performance and best management practices. It's kind of this perfect breeding ground for the blue economy. And so we wanted to get organized and really start drawing investment towards this work. And so I would say we do have a keen focus on port operations and maritime shipping and logistics. We have a keen focus on electrification, with the electrification of our state ferry system, the largest ferry system in the US. And we do that in great partnership and reverence with our friends in Norway. And a great focus on ocean science technology, including marine energy, with great assets there between our the University of Washington and the Pacific Northwest National Lab. So I would say that's really where some of those focus are. And you include fishing and seafood with our relationship with Alaska. And it's really the kind of technology integration between those multiple aspects where we're trying to focus investment. I can leave it there. That we'll engage further. You might still be muted, Craig.
Thank you for that. I shouldn't do that. I'm going to turn it over to Alaska now, who produces 60% of the United States seafood and possesses well over half of the nation's coastline and potential ocean energy resources, which led to their launching of the Alaska Ocean Cluster, modeled after successes in Norway, Iceland, Ireland, and others. So tell us, what's the key direction Alaska is going in the blue economy, Justin?
Thanks, Craig. I think what we're seeing is that there's tremendous developments happening in full utilization elsewhere around the world that we can borrow from. And so we're looking at what those models are and the technologies that are driving them. We're at about 65% utilization right now, meaning 35% of the biomass is just being discarded. And that represents an incredible opportunity for us to develop new markets and also to create jobs that are in the Alaskan communities throughout the state, many of which are remote and rural and would benefit from having value-added processing, additional value-added processing in their communities. There's quite a bit of brain drain happening in those remote rural communities where kids go off and get their degrees in higher education and then cannot come back to their communities to work unless they're a doctor or a teacher. So there's opportunities there as this scales up to do that kind of economic development in those areas. And then a tremendous opportunity emerging in mariculture, particularly seaweed mariculture. Alaska, as you mentioned, has more than 50% of the United States coastline. It's incredibly biodiverse. It's got an incredible seafood brand that will build on with the development of mariculture. And many of the species of seaweeds that are grown there are analogous to other species that are commercially grown throughout Asia. Over 98% of the seaweed in the United States that's consumed for human consumption is coming from Asia. And so it's basically an unlimited market for us to start tapping into. And we've seen a lot of growth in the past 5 years from kind of a nascent inception. I was part of the team that worked to develop the state's protocols for permitting, and we permitted the first hatchery and the first seaweed farms. And now the number of applications are growing exponentially, as are the size of the applications. So there's a lot of opportunities there, and that opens up just an enormous amount of markets. One thing that we've seen over time is that the fisheries have become more and more concentrated outside of the state in terms of the revenue. A lot of it's going to Seattle, and that's something that I think we can reverse with the seaweed, in particular because the biomass is so huge that it will need processing in the areas where it's being grown. And working with other ocean clusters is one of our top priorities. We don't have a strong technological base in Alaska because we're very small. And so other clusters like Maritime Blue or further south along the West Coast have developed those technologies, and working with them to bring them to Alaska, as well as cultivating entrepreneurs within our own state, is a priority. You're muted again, sorry.
I'm just going to rely on you guys instead of being the moderator here. This is terrible. So I was just saying, wow, 98%. That's amazing. I'm sure a question will come back on that one. If not for myself, someone else. But a great opportunity. Now a question for our leaders back home, Julie and Kate. So ocean data, each of your respective organizations are leading in this area. Tell us why we need to study the ocean as part of the emerging blue economy, and maybe touch on some of the commercial opportunities in this space going forward. And Kate, why don't we start with you, and then we'll hear from Julie.
Okay, well, thanks, and thanks for inviting me. This is a great panel. There's a huge amount of opportunities. I just want to introduce it by saying that in 2016, the OECD report that predicted a $3 trillion market by 2030 for the blue economy. They did an update to that, which then reflects the definitions you started with, Craig, in terms of the blue economy, where the critical need in this space is to ensure sustainability, take advantage of innovation networks, and establish global metrics and sustained observing. And the sustained observing, that's what our hallmark is. We're the world leading cabled ocean observing system. And we need to understand and keep our oceans sustainable for supporting some of the industries that we just heard from Justin and others. And so understanding how the ocean is doing is really important. But there are other areas that ocean data are really critically important. One is in marine transportation. In order to make ships more efficient, one of the ways to do that is actually measuring ocean noise. As ships become more inefficient, burn more fuel, they become noisier. That's just one example. So we can move down that path to help us get less emissions from ships. The mariculture that was just mentioned, in order to continually improve the efficiency and the speed at which kelp, for example, can be grown, you need to monitor the ocean environment, so that just like in the agriculture on land, you begin to improve those practices again and again to yield the biggest crop. But in addition to that, kelp actually is a negative emission technology, if you will. It removes CO2 from the atmosphere. So you have this win-win going on with investing in that industry. The other area is climate change adaptation services. There's two big areas that we're going to need more climate change adaptation services. And Ocean Networks Canada is starting down this path with developing data products in that area. One is we need to have better forecasting for inundation associated with sea level rise, so that companies can begin to manage their assets on the coast. And of course, the public and the community needs that information. And those kind of climate adaptation services have a global marketplace, because greater than 50% of the population in the world lives within about 10 kilometers of the coastline. Of course, renewable energy, but here on Vancouver Island, we are on a subduction coast, so we have very deep water close to land. So we could be in the cutting edge of actually growing the offshore wind industry on floating platforms. Washington State is moving in that direction. Oregon is moving in that direction. We could be part of that to help accelerate that technology. Again, then you're able to then grow renewable energy in other parts of the world where there's quite a bit of deep water. And finally, I touched on carbon negative emissions technologies. Kelp is one of them. There are other ocean-based carbon removal solutions that are now being studied and advanced in terms of many groups in the US and globally. Ocean Networks Canada is doing a research study right now on a negative emission technology that combines carbon engineering's air captures to removing it and sequestering permanently carbon dioxide into the subsea floor. So I just touched on a wide range of areas, but we're well positioned to begin to not do everything at once, but we have the know-how and a lot of some of the technology already in place to help us move in those directions. And I'll just say one more thing before I stop. Yeah. One of the reasons we understand, if we didn't have observations of the ocean, we wouldn't know that 90% of the heat that's been generated from global warming is in the ocean, which is a problem. We got to figure that out. A third of that CO2 that's in the atmosphere that we burn to put into the atmosphere is now has been absorbed by the ocean, and then it produces much of the oxygen we breathe. So, good reason to observe and protect the ocean.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Julie.
Yeah, and obviously I couldn't agree more. I think understanding our oceans is incredibly important. And part of the reason is that we still know very little about our oceans. It's often said that we know more about space than our oceans. And this is largely due to the fact that our oceans are huge, covering 71% of our planet. They're extremely difficult to go out in with severe weather states. Much of it is very remote, and it's very expensive. So the shift towards towards getting more data from our oceans has come with advances in technology. So marine robotics, more advanced sensors, better communication systems, satellite technology. And this is really crucial for protecting our oceans, ensuring that they continue to be sustainable. As Kate mentioned, our oceans play a critical role in the health of our planet. They also play a critical role in our economies. It is currently a $2.5 trillion economy. Our oceans are how most of our goods are transported. Our oceans are responsible for protein for large swaths of our population. We depend on our wild fisheries as well as aquaculture. Our oceans are a source of energy. We find therapeutics in our oceans. The list is endless of the important role our oceans can play. And I think there's an increasing focus and understanding that if we can better understand our oceans, we can ensure that we are fueling these industries, that we're able to build sustainable economies, and that we're able to continue to thrive in the ocean ecosystem. So for our company, we're involved in the marine robotics space. We have solar powered USVs, uncrewed surface vehicles that can go out and collect data and then communicate that in real time. So it's one part of the solution to better understanding our oceans, and where we've seen our technology applied and making a difference, and areas that we're working on is protecting against illegal fishing. Currently, 30% of the fish caught is caught illegally. This has a huge impact, and it's very difficult to enforce. Many marine protected areas where there is supposed to be no fishing are very remote. So autonomous technology can provide a way to provide surveillance in areas that are currently unprotected. Another area that we're active in is monitoring for marine mammal populations. So for example, on the east coast of Canada, we have the endangered North Atlantic right whale. On the west coast, we have the endangered southern resident killer whale. Our marine mammals are very much impacted by the noise in our oceans, by the vessel traffic, and by being able to better know where they are, we can ensure their protection. So that's an area where acoustics, hydrophones in the water can play a role. So I very much feel that as we continue to advance, having a focus on getting better data from our oceans will really help drive this industry forward, as well as the sustainability of our oceans. Thanks.
Hopefully, just a quick question for both of you, just of sheer curiosity. We make these statements about the ocean as this last frontier on the earth, or sort of our next frontier, if you will. That there's just so much information we don't have that we think we need. How do you guys focus in on what you go after, and you know, what determined that focus? What do we need first, and sort of why? Kate, if you can.
Sure. Well, one of the reasons we don't know the ocean very well is because the satellites don't penetrate the surface of the ocean. And so even though we have really detailed information about land from a wide variety of sensors, we have zip about the volume of the ocean. So that's why Ocean Networks Canada was built, because we actually put sensors in the sea beneath the surface to understand those changes. But I have to say that one of the efforts that's going on globally right now is we don't have a detailed map of the seafloor. And there's an effort going on right now to actually map the entire ocean floor. It's astonishing. We know more about Mars and the moon, and maps of those are in great detail. So that begins to provide us, there's just the baseline information. I mentioned earlier, 90% of the heat that has been generated from climate change is in the ocean. And we need to measure that in the deepest part of our ocean. And there's another global program going on called Argo. Argo are autonomous floats. And these are, you know, Julie's company is actually leading the way in getting more autonomous systems out there. But Argo's been around for a while. They used to only go in the top 2 kilometers of the ocean. Now they're going to be going down to 6 kilometers. So we'll begin to understand that, because we need to be able to understand what's going to happen with the ocean so that we can forecast what's going to happen with the climate better. So I would put those at the top, getting sensors into the sea beneath the surface, either autonomously like Julie's company is doing, or what we're doing in terms of connected cables, mapping the seafloor, and then measuring the places in the ocean floor that we know very, very little about.
Excellent. Thank you, Kate. Julie, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree. Those measurements are crucial for coastal resilience, safe transit, endless applications. And another point I would add to that is I sit on the Innovation Advisory Board for NATO's Maritime Unmanned Systems. And this is looking at how we can use uncrewed systems to really increase our awareness of the ocean for protection, but also for protection, for security protection, but also protection against the challenges of climate change, of overfishing. So looking at really creating a data set that is both vertically and horizontally integrated. So from space to seafloor, understanding what's going on, and then across millions of nautical miles, and having this be information that can be used for a number of different applications, both commercial as well as defense, and being able to reach across a broad range of stakeholders across different countries, and have it be standardized so that we can maximize the information we can get from this data system.
Yeah, that's oh yeah, go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, one more thing. This one of the very our planet actually is instrumented, if you will, in the oceans, and that's by telecommunication cables. So we have telecommunication cables that are now are going to be installed in the Arctic. They cross all the ocean basins. And so that's how we get, 99% of our internet connectivity currently. It may change, but it would take a lot of bandwidth through satellites to change it. But you see, every 50 to 100 kilometers is repeaters. And there's no reason why we couldn't be moving towards actually instrumenting those systems so we get multiple use out of them to better understand the ocean. And there's an international effort underway to test some new systems to integrate important sensor systems to actually understand the ocean better.
Wow, great. The amount of big data being generated just probably blow my mind. Interesting, thank you both. Christian, now we'll go back out, if we will. You've seen a lot of successful ocean clusters around the world. Tell us why this cluster approach is suitable here in Victoria, in our region, and what would need to be done in order to organize our ocean sector to better capitalize on the growth of this blue ocean economy, or blue economy, sorry.
And Craig, thank you for the question. And you said 2 minutes or 2 hours to give a answer. No, I've seen a lot of different economies around the world and in different sectors. And one thing that struck me is, as you all know, the concept of silos. They're very siloed traditionally around verticals and value chains. And then we look at the pace of innovation, like how do we make innovation move faster? And we find that within many of these economies, companies operate in bubbles, which is not uncommon. So when you apply a cluster framework, you basically build yourself an innovation engine that helps you innovate across the traditional value chains. It's really that simple. Clusters work when they help companies, big and small, innovate faster by doing many different things: connecting people, building trust, sharing ideas, building relationships, coming up with new concepts, spinning out new companies, raising money faster, connecting people that wouldn't normally be connected. But the essence is you build these trust-based collaboration platforms, and especially for knowledge-driven economies, they really, really work. So I've talked to many governments and said, we should think of clusters as the backbone of the national innovation system. And if you don't have clusters, you're missing a big piece of your ability to move forward. So, you know, when we talk about Victoria, we talk about the ocean potential. I think there's a massive opportunity to develop ocean-based clusters in your part of the world, Craig.
I'll unmute myself this time. Thank you. A question for all of you. What are the top emerging market opportunities in the global blue economy? And maybe Christian, just because you're on here, why don't we start with you on that question?
So that's not a good question. So I think that every region should look at what are the competencies that we have, you know, in our part of the world, and then you ask the question, which emerging economies are more suitable for us. When I look at, you know, the western parts of Canada, I'm thinking three things. Number one, I'm thinking advanced technologies around ships, autonomous ships, and robotic ships systems. I mean, kind of Julie's field, but at a much bigger scale. You know, we know for a fact that autonomous ships is going to be a standard. The only question is, who are the companies and which are the regions that's going to compete, and which are the regions that's going to be left behind when we're making that transition. So that's one. The second is actually, and Kate nailed it early on, it's offshore floating wind. If you're not competing and positioning yourself in the global market for offshore wind today, you're going to lose out. It is a multi-billion market, and countries like Norway and Denmark are just sprinting all over the world to get the best projects and the best positions. So if Western Canada isn't actively competing, not on technology, but on go-to-market, you're already falling behind. And then finally, third, I would actually say aquaculture. I think that when we look at the need for proteins and we look at the need for sustainable food, we should really look into what could we do with advanced offshore technologies that allows us to develop not land-based and not near shore-based, but far offshore aquaculture industries. And those are three, Craig, examples of opportunities which I think that your region would easily find big markets for.
Thank you, Christian. That's great. Maybe we'll jump back. Maybe Joshua, if you can jump on and answer that.
Yeah. I mean, I think we follow Christian's lead there, and you know, Scandinavia has done a phenomenal job on all three of those in terms of offshore aquaculture, wind, and autonomy as well. You know, and I think for us here, that's kind of the longer term play for us here in Washington State, at least. And there are challenges on all of that front, on each of those fronts. Some of those are dirty words here in Washington State we have to be careful about, and yet at the same time set ourselves up, because there are lots of us who know that this is kind of where we're going. And so how do we set ourselves up for that? In the meantime, also, we're working hard in a lot of the intermediary steps. Electrification is really big for us. Energy storage growth that's happening. You know, we both collaborate and compete with our great friends and colleagues in British Columbia on that aspect. Terminal efficiencies and operations, there's still a lot of work to happen there. How do we just move drayage trucks efficiently in and out? How do we do that cleanly? How do we start to move towards zero emission first and last mile transportation in and out of our major container gateways? Both the case for, you know, certainly for Vancouver and down here in Washington State too. So those are really important. When we look at the offshore wind market, one is we have great expertise and research capabilities here. We have challenges. We do not think that offshore wind is going to land first on the coast of Washington State. One, it's kind of far from our population centers, so just making the leap of just getting the power from our coast to our centers is a challenge for us. However, we're at the front end of developing those technologies, designing as well as the transportation and logistics around offshore wind across the entire West Coast. Our ability with deep water ports, and the same thing in BC, to be able to produce, build, move, and design for markets from Hawaii to San Diego, we think we're going to be able to be in a strong position on that. So that's a big focus for us too.
Okay, excellent. Christian, did you have a comment on that? I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, just really quickly. I think Joshua said something very important, and that is do we innovate around our home markets, or do we innovate for export markets from day one? And we've seen some countries, with Norway being one of them, basically saying that we don't have a home market for offshore floating wind, for example. But that shouldn't stop us from claiming these positions elsewhere. And I think that countries that are able to take that approach is going to get a completely unfair advantage by sprinting out, claiming market positions, and then just figuring out the rest along the way. So that's one thing that we see happening here in terms of there's no home market, no problem, we'll go find a different market. Not saying it's easy, but it does change the dynamics quite extensively.
I see, excellent. Yeah, you think we'd have that built into our DNA with beasts like Microsoft and Amazon at our doorstep, who certainly work around the world, but when we look at the ocean, we tend to think about what are we doing immediately right here, not how it applies to everywhere. So interesting comment. Julie, did you have any comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree that we really need to be export focused. I think a lot of ocean tech companies in Canada serve global markets more than our home market. It's just, we're not a huge country in terms of the size of our economy. So that's really important. I think we have a lot of strengths in Canada and in Western Canada that we can build on to grow our ocean tech companies and to also draw other companies here. We can look at Ocean Networks Canada and their fiber optic sensor cable network, and how things like that can be used to allow other companies to test their technology here, leveraging the expertise in our academic institutions in some of these companies to allow certain industries to really flourish.
Excellent. Thank you, Julie. Kate, I don't know if you had time to weigh in on that. Go ahead.
I just wanted to, an emerging market, it will be carbon removal technologies. And how I'm seeing that is companies like Swiss Re, the second biggest reinsurance company in the world, is already developing their business model where they're going to be moving their clients to establish carbon removal investments in their portfolios. So it's clear we're going to have to remove CO2. That's bottom line. Science says it. We got to get on with it. So it's not happening now, but we are in a position to begin to be a leader in the ocean space. I'm on a panel of the U.S. National Academies right now that's looking at how can we fast track ocean-based carbon removal. And so once those kind of initial studies that are taking research to actually delivery, we could be at the ground floor of this, what's going to be a growing market.
Excellent. I think I got everyone's feedback on that one. I'd be remiss not to ask this next question, which I know Emily had said probably wrote, but I'm going to ask it here. Where it is a sub question of what we were just asking about market opportunities. So where are these opportunities going to be located? She has example Asia Pacific versus Europe, and what, if any, might the new comprehensive and progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP trade bloc, mean, or other free trade agreements for Canadian companies that want to capture these opportunities? Who wants to tackle that? Really? Go ahead.
Craig, I'll be happy to take it. So one thing that we've seen, and I'll tie it back to some cluster theory, is this concept of global growth programs. And these global programs, I'm sure you have similar in your parts of Canada, is basically the cluster members do market exploration programs together. But they do them in very outlying fields that most members wouldn't really look at because it seems too far-fetched. But by organizing cluster members into these market explorations, surprisingly many of them have come back with, wow, we just went to East Africa and we found a very large market for floating solar. Now, problem, none of us do floating solar, but the market opportunity was so big. So on the way home, we sketched out a few ideas and we're going to see what we can do about them. So the best clusters, they don't have the answer. They don't know which markets and which market needs, but they organize smart people. They go on very specific market exploration trips. And they've proven very, very successful in turning those into specific opportunities that now is being explored. So a cluster with a 5-year time frame, for example, should be able to organize some 20 or 25 of these, we call them global growth programs, and develop specific projects with specific revenue targets on behalf of the cluster members. So that is more of a methodology than a quick answer, but it's a methodology that works.
I might just add real quickly, there's the market explorations, and we've done this quite a bit with our Norwegian partners. We have kind of sister cluster organizations, the NCE Maritime Clean Tech Cluster in the Bergen area that comes to Washington State, and we head over there. So there's the market opportunities, but there's also the tech transfer opportunities. You know, when we're looking, for example, we're in the process of designing and developing a zero emission foiling fast ferry. And there's for example, just some gearing where we just don't have the supply chain here in the US or that's going to make this particular vessel and design work. Well, we've got a company that's over there. It's a member of that cluster organization over there that might be a perfect fit for here. So there's a tech transfer opportunity as well as the market when you're trying to. We have a big focus on large-scale demonstration projects and using the cluster to organize and bring a supply chain and/or competitors together to build something. So there's that opportunity there as well.
Perfect.
Just have to say, I mean, I think there's just so much opportunity in Victoria, in British Columbia, in this region for developing our ocean ecosystem. And I think we're just at the beginning of creating the cluster and the network and the hub to maximize those opportunities. Like when we look at other regions where these are more established, like whether it's the East Coast of Canada or Alaska or Washington State or Norway, they have a lot of different initiatives in place. They already have accelerators and clusters and hubs. And those are things that we're just starting to put into place now. And when we have that kind of structure and capability, it's going to just accelerate what we can do as an industry. It's going to let us go after those global opportunities to bring companies here and really add tremendous value.
Oh, excellent. Thank you all. I'm going to make my way. I'm going to ask one more question, sort of related, and I know it's, and then I'm going to dive into the audience questions here. Joshua, I originally had this written down after you were talking, but I think Justin and perhaps all of us can talk a little bit about it, and there's been little statements made, but our regions are so close and economically linked in so many ways. Are there areas where you can see collaboration between us further benefiting our region? And so what I'm looking for more is, from each of you, what specifically do you see those as being? And maybe
I'll jump in there.
Justin will jump in.
And just add, I think that there's challenges, that we share between BC and Alaska in terms of our remote coastlines and just operating in some of those rural environments. So I think that, to the extent that we can collaborate on that, it's a win-win for both regions to figure that out. A lot of, I think, the coastal economies are similar right now, heavily tourism focused fisheries. And at least in Alaska, the history has been kind of, a colonial mindset where we're exporting raw materials rather than doing the value added processing. And I'm sure to some extent that's also true in BC, at least when you look at like timber or mining and that sort of thing. So I think there's ways that as we look at modeling the progress that we want to see in the next 5 years, and we look at ways that we can bring and keep money in our communities, it's very similar. And to the extent that we can work together to develop those new economic models and solve the common problems that we share, it becomes a very good alignment.
Yeah, that makes complete sense and understand. So the really the challenges around being remote, being on the ocean, being in sort of the area that we are in our topography, all that kind of stuff. We have similar problems that will take seemingly similar solutions that we can share. Joshua, you being so close, you know, we have less of a problem on the remote side. What about specific, you know, things that you see between us immediately here that we can benefit from?
Well, I think the favorite word that I've learned over the last couple of years is a co-opetition, right? And I think there's lots of different ways in which our regions are competing with one another, but can't grow at all without cooperating with one another. And I think specifically in the ocean, I mean, think of just physically, right? There's are clear that there is one ocean on the planet. There is one blue economy on the planet, right? It is a global economy in everything from transportation to digitalization. And I think, and maybe because in some ways it's nascent in terms of a high growth technology sector, or where we're able to drive private and public investment into, it's nascent enough where we're only growing if we're cooperating. We're sharing access to investors. We're building impact investment metrics together. I'm sending a founder that comes out of our accelerator over to Oslo or Singapore, wherever it might be. And so I think in specifics between Victoria and Washington State and Seattle, I think there's a lot there. I think ocean data, certainly for one, underwater UUVs. I think autonomy and autonomous systems is another area where we can really cooperate with one another. And then, the ocean sensing and technology sector, the work that's happening out of the applied physics labs at the University of Washington and the sensor networks and the like. There's no reason we're not cooperating, further. I know we are some, but lots of opportunity. There's already the Cascadia corridor that's developed between Vancouver, Seattle, and Portland. So lots there. And then, our relationship with Alaska, albeit that there is a sense and very true history of this kind of colonization, and that's something that we need to combat all the time. But our maritime, fisheries, transportation sectors are inextricably linked. The amount of jobs that's created in Tacoma because of our relationship with Alaska is enormous, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then 90% of everything on a shelf in Anchorage comes through the ports of Seattle or Tacoma. So there's, we are interdependent, that is for sure. And we just need to work on the fringes of the dependencies. And I think we with at least within our sectors, we get beyond the politics and we know how that relationship works. So.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So we have about 6 or 7 questions here from our guests, and I'll try to combine some of them, but they're actually quite specific. Let's start with a specific one here. What are the panelists doing or should be doing about sea level rise, which will impact many coastal communities? What are the innovation opportunities? Netherlands, by necessity, have taken on this challenge. And the question comes from Inglis Milbergs. Who wants to take a first crack?
Sorry.
Okay, Kate, go ahead.
Yeah, so we were already working on this problem, but it's really trying to build a service industry around this. So what we have been doing is working with many partners to actually get really detailed, what's called digital elevation models of areas of the coast of Canada that are most at risk right now. And then that helps us to forecast where the areas will be inundated. And that then informs what you do. You have barriers, which is a hard thing, a hardened coastline, which is at risk of eventually being overturned, plans to move or plans to individually build resilience in the areas that will be inundated. And so I view that as that kind of know-how is going to be needed globally to make decisions about either staying in place and hardened or retreat. And certainly all coastal infrastructure operators and certainly the military need to have these kinds of information because they may have stranded assets as sea level rise.
Thank you, Kate. Does anybody else want to add to that? Let's take one more if we don't.
Sure. Yeah, I was just going to say coastal resilience is extremely important. We're going to see, more extreme weather impacts with higher sea levels, the impact of the waves. So better forecasting, more localized weather forecasting is important. So once again, going back to data, having hydrographic surveying of the coastline so we can really understand the topography to go into those models is also really important.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, I'll move to another one here. I'm gonna this one here. How can we stimulate a knowledge cluster that will link the ocean sciences, harvesters, processors, and chefs so we can brand the Pacific Northwest seafood industry as natural and sustainable? I don't know if Justin might want to tackle that one.
Sure. Yeah, I think the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute has done a tremendous job doing just that with Alaskan seafood, and I would look to their model as a way forward. It's an international brand that they've built that's really well respected.
Okay. Anybody else? Go ahead, Kate. You're on mute, but go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Justin, are they moving forward with innovative food solutions around kelp as well?
Yeah, it's definitely on their radar, and they are beginning to incorporate and come up with a game plan for it.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Another question here comes from Bill Collins. How do we translate ocean technologies into jobs in our coastal communities? I don't know if Christian, you want to jump on that one.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So in all clusters, I hear a lot about technology and I hear a lot about science. And these are, of course, important pillars. But there's one thing, Craig, that we very rarely hear about, and that is the importance of capital and having functioning capital markets. So from a very early seed stage up to growth capital and all the way up to public markets, that is an absolute necessity to be able to translate into jobs. For example, a couple of weeks ago, there was a Norwegian company, Ocean Sun. They do floating solar. They went public with 9 employees, but they managed to go public with such a tiny company and raise significant amount of money because of the market forecast and the market outlook. So when I look at the pipeline of ocean tech companies that are sort of en route to go public in Norway, there's hundreds of millions sort of coming into the economy. And we need that money to be able to create those jobs. So if we need to do that translation, I would say improve capital markets from seed to public, and that will translate into jobs. Easy to say, a little bit harder to do.
I think the other piece that we're focused on, especially now, is we as our state and everybody around the globe is now focused on economic recovery, is where are we going to invest? And that's really in our capital budget. So we're thinking about the state and its infrastructure development. And there's so much a part of the blue economy that's going to require the infrastructure of the future, from our utilities and grids to terminals to coastline resiliency. And that's how we're going to create jobs, right? We've got a $2 billion revenue shortfall for our operating budget here in Washington State. But we've got a great opportunity to increase our transportation capital budgets, our capital budgets for infrastructure development. Now is exactly the time to be investing in that work, which is creating jobs on the back end too. Everything from building the infrastructure to building the systems that'll support sustained jobs.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. It's a broad question, and I like from Mayra Cordero. What are you specifically excited about in this conversation? And she adds, and how as a student, a professional, and a mom can help you achieve the goals that you're talking about?
Well, I can jump in here, Craig. I'm first and foremost excited about the diversity of perspectives that I'm hearing. There are many different views. If we had this panel back in Norway, it would be a much more, similar men 45 wearing jackets and talking about short-term economic targets. So that's what I'm excited about, the diversity. And in terms of what you can do, well, basically, we gotta take this thing about ocean technology and ocean startups and bring it into all sorts of educational level, from kindergarten to schools and high schools and colleges. So if we can have parents and teachers kind of nudge kids into looking into this as an exciting future, that would be a pretty big deal.
I was going to say the same thing around awareness, right? Every other breath we take, that oxygen comes out of the ocean, and most people just don't know. So go out sailing on a tall ship, go down to the water's edge, become aware, because it's that awareness that leads, to folks pursuing opportunities and ideas. It brings the capital that Christian's talking about that's necessary from seed to public. So I think especially in Seattle, it's Seattle, right? We are a waterborne, working waterfront town. Most people don't have any idea about what happens along the working waterfront, or even non-working waterfront. The water's edge at all, it's not accessible. Folks don't understand what's going on down there. We have jobs we can't fill that are mostly old white men, and it's absolutely an awareness issue. So we just need to start there.
Excellent, thank you. I think, Kate, you have a comment. Maybe I just double checked on the time. I got immersed in this, and we have 3 minutes left. So maybe this will be our closing answer. Go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're doing at Ocean Networks Canada is we are installing smaller versions of observatories in coastal communities, mainly Indigenous communities. And then we actually think that we hire an Indigenous youth to actually be that person that connects the technology to the community and the schools. And what we see anecdotally, of course, we have to wait till we actually have more people involved. We're actually seeing in a community like Nunavut, Cambridge Bay Nunavut, that when, we've been there since 2012, when people go there and ask kids what do they want to be, and when they grow up, they talk about oceanographers and ocean scientists and ocean technology. So it's really getting this stuff in the hands of kids and the data. And we also stream everything live when we're at sea, so people can participate in everything we do. So again, it's the engagement piece that's really important.
Excellent, thank you. And I think Joshua, you might have even mentioned that in the beginning, in an added piece to the effort of clusters being about also producing resilient and equitable communities and involving everything. We got to reach into all of our strengths. I want to thank you all. I really wanted to sort of wrap this up and conclude with a concluding statement, but wow, what a lot of information. We have a lot of other questions that are still unanswered on the board. We want to let those people know that we'll answer those questions in turn eventually here. I want to thank all of our esteemed panelists, Kate, Julie, Christian, Justin, and Joshua. Thank you so much for taking the time to take the hot seat on this Friday morning and shared your hard-earned knowledge with all of us. And in lieu of gifts, we'll be supporting local businesses through Support Local BC. And on that, again, thank you so much. And I think I turn it over to Kieran now, and he'll close with a few comments about what's up next and what to look for. Oh, one thing, horrible of me, but I did say thank you at the beginning. Thank you, Babcock Canada, for sponsoring this session. And of course, thank you, RBC and Western Diversification Canada, for supporting this whole Rising Economy Week. Thank you so much, everybody.